We all know Paul loved poetry. He loved to read it aloud with Cooey and friends. T.S. Eliot was one of his favorite poets, especially for quartets. He told me that last spring and winter when he was ill, he had a copy of the volume by his bedside and read it for comfort and inspiration. I'm going to read a passage from The Dry Salvages, which was a favorite of his. And I think it's a poem about the meaning or the essence of being. When there is distress of nations and perplexity, whether on the shores of Asia or on the Edgware Road, men's curiosity searches past and future and clings to that dimension. But to apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love, ardor, selflessness, and self-surrender. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distinction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or music so deeply felt that it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. Here, the impossible union of spheres of existence is actual. Here, the past and future are conquered and reconciled, where action were otherwise movement of that which is only moved and has in it no source of movement, driven by demonic, chthonic powers. And right action is freedom from past and future also. For most of us, this is the aim, never to be realized, who are only undefeated because we have gone on trying. We, content at the last, if our temporal reversion nourish, not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil.
But now I'd like to invite the Harper children and the two eldest grandchildren to come on up.
Hi, I'm Lindsay, and today is Dad's 93rd birthday. And 30 years ago, on my 30th birthday, Dad made me a cake. And it was not an ordinary cake. And I did a little bit of casual research, and I discovered that this was indeed the only cake that Dad ever made in his lifetime. It was a round, wooden, sturdy crate, and there were 36-inch dowels that he had somehow managed to hammer into the top so they looked like candles. And on every candle, there was a caption like, "Shake it," or "That's the way," or "Uh-huh," or "Twist." And it was a wonderful gift, and it was the best cake I ever had. Today is not an ordinary birthday, and I want to thank each one of you for being here to celebrate with us the life of Dad. And I also want to say, Dad, happy birthday.
Hi, my name is Jessica. It was suggested that each of us talk about something that we were grateful to Dad for. And it was kind of a tough one because I'm grateful to Dad for so many things. But there was one particular thing that sprang to mind, which was one day, it was about 50 years ago, or maybe it was longer, but who's counting? Dad said he was going to take some of us to the Art Institute of Chicago to visit the Impressionists. My parents have always been very big on exposing their children to the arts, although I have to say occasionally I think some of us would have preferred to stay home and watch the Mickey Mouse Club in our underpants. But anyway, we went with him on this occasion, and as we entered the gallery, I was starting to get that sort of bored, headachy thing I used to get at museums. And Dad took me by the hand and placed me squarely in front of Seurat's famous painting, Sunday at La Grande Jatte. And he pointed out the pointillism, and I got very interested. I have had a passion for Impressionism ever since that time, and I'm very grateful to Dad for that. I'm also very grateful that I was able to share this exact story with him just about 2 weeks ago and express my gratitude to him in person. And as we gather today, to celebrate his life, we are all sharing memories and stories of all the millions of moments we spent with him. I think if you assembled the millions of moments of his life and stood back and looked at them as a whole, it would be a beautiful thing.
I'm Sam Harper. My brother Billy unfortunately could not be here today, and he sent a letter that I'm going to read from him and his wife, Rachel. Rachel and I are deeply sorry not to be with you today to celebrate Dad's life. Rachel is in the hospital recovering from very recent surgery, and I will remain here in Chicago by her side. We both remember him with love and admiration. On our visits, he and Rachel would spend hours together in his studio quietly painting. When I was young, Dad made a practice of reading important novels out loud to us. Among his and my own favorites were the Mark Twain books. Particularly important to me was his very real admiration of the character Huck Finn. He asked me many times, "So, Billy, are you going to shinny down the drain pipe tonight?" I took this as a license, even a hope, that I might do such a thing, and I did. And I still, for better or worse, am shinning down the drain pipe looking for adventure. And finally, I got a note of condolence from a boyfriend of Diana's in high school who told me that early in that courtship, Dad had given him a copy of Erich Fromm's The Art of Loving. Extreme generosity from the father of a teenage girl. But Fromm was advocating for a love that pressed beyond the everyday. He thought that we could have a world bound together by what love does when love is an adventure and not an acquisition. That love isn't be mine, but it is something that happens and keeps happening. This sense of love was conveyed to us by both of our parents as we watched them practice this in their own relationship and their relationships to us. Billy's a musician, and after I finish my band, we're going to play that piece of music. He loved to laugh. He was very generous with his laughter. He loved a limerick. He loved a well-told joke, but he was not a jokester. He was never the guy who said, "Hey, did you hear the one about the priest, the rabbi, and the fire engine?" His humor was based on love of language and what I called a deep appreciation for the catastrophic. So all of his stories and his words and his phrases had a real edge to them, a real dark edge. There were words and word combinations that he liked to just say. He'd be sitting in his chair, reading his newspaper like this, and apropos of nothing, out of context, just because he liked to say the words, he would say them. And there were hundreds of them that he said over the years, but there were a few that stuck. So he's sitting in his chair, and we're sitting by, and we hear, "Bug house." Just the words that he liked. And then Shabazz was a big one. Don't know what that means. And then Atom Bomb was a big favorite of his. I just don't know. But his favorite of all was Monkey's Hat. And then there were his go-to phrases. When one of us got up from the dinner table before dinner was finished, he didn't say, "Where are you going?" He said, "Who gave you permission to dismount?" If there was somebody he didn't like, he didn't say, "Well, I'm not really a fan of that guy." He said, "I am going to step on that guy's air hose." When a friend lapsed into dementia, he said, "Oh, it's too bad. Her wig flew right off." And he'd never say that somebody had an affair. He'd say that they jumped the fence. And then last winter, he barely survived a bout of pneumonia, and he called me and said, "Wow, Sam, I was halfway to the cannery." He referred to a dangling limb as a widowmaker. He called his dermatologist the skinola. His physical therapist was the leg bender. And his proctologist was that man from down south. So, thank you, Dad, for bringing so much color into our lives. I love you for it, but really, who gave you permission to dismount? Oh, now I'm going to play this song that Billy sent. And it is, he's a musician, and this is a setting of Lamentations, O Vos Omnis, pardon my French, that was sung by all the male characters in an opera that he wrote called El Greco. And the text is in Latin and translates, "All of you passing by me on this road, look at me and see if there could be any grief as deep as the grief I feel."
beautiful representation of my brother Billy here. Beautiful piece of music, and you're a beautiful sight of loving people. I wish I could have all your stories. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Diana Harper. I'm from Alaska. And 3 of my dad's great-grandchildren live there. And they got a chance to know him this summer. And upon the news of his passing, they immediately burst into tears, which means he touched them in the short time that they were together. He touched their lives also, as he seemed to have touched yours, or you wouldn't be here. Thank you so much for coming. It means so much to all of the whole family. We were talking about, as his children, we were talking about what gift our father gave to us. And I wrote out what gift he gave to me. One of the many, but this was my focus. In 1942, a great theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, gave lectures and led discussions at the Yale University Christian Conference. Somehow I doubt that they have those anymore. But in 1942, my father was required to attend and write a paper with another classmate. When I was thinking about a single gift my father gave me, I decided to focus, no, not on my Christian faith, but rather on endurance through the midst of adversity. That is not something that is handed to you in a nice, neat little package. That is something you are taught, and he taught us endurance through mountain climbing. In 1942, my father might have heard Reinhold Niebuhr say the following. So he did say this: "Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any context of history." And boy, that was true for us in the context of our history, especially at the beginning of our mountain climbing career. All we could see was dirt, rocks, sagebrush, and ants in the path that went upward, ever upward, always upward. It made no sense to us at all. But then, when we got to the top, the truth, the beauty of reaching the summit was so good. We were saved by my dad's faith that if we endured and did not quit, we would be able to see why we did it in the end. Reinhold Niebuhr also may have said in the lectures of Yale, "Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone." When we noticed that the torturous uphill climbs were never shortened or changed at all by our opinions, we tried another tactic: slowing down, singing songs, doing mud packs, picking flowers, and so on. Dad just forged ahead because he had anticipated rebellion and had placed an adjutant at the rear, Mom. They would never have gotten us up those mountains without loving one another enough to agree about what they wanted for their children. It could not have been done alone. There's no way. They loved us enough to work together and help us endure to the end through all the forms of resistance that rise up within us when we face hardship. They loved us enough to help us stop complaining and go for it. We were saved by that love. Finally, Reinhold Niebuhr could have said in one of his discussions with the young Yale undergraduates, "Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime." When we arrived at the top of any mountain in the Rockies, there was always a grand vista of ranges beyond where we stood. And that highlights something that is true about all human relationships. You go through something with someone and you think you know them, and in fact, you find there are infinite unexplored ranges ahead to discover. My father left a trail of journals, articles, books, paintings, photographs, and there was still more to know. Getting to know him was something worth doing, and it was not completed in our lifetime. I have never lived anywhere by choice where there were no mountains, or at least some self-respecting hills to climb. I now live in a house with a view of the Alaska Range, and the name of the street is Mountain View. When I need help to rise above and deal with what is before me, I lift up my eyes to the mountains, and I know that there is hope for us all. My father gave me the gift of endurance in the face of adversity. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello, I'm Siobhan, the first Harper grandchild who has reaped over the years the wonderful fruits of my grandfather's varied and full life. He discovered each of our interests and met them with conversation, encouragement, and of course, books and books and books. And on the day my grandfather passed away, I said I wasn't going to do this. One memory in particular came back with clarity. This weekend, I found out that it is a memory shared not only by all of the grandchildren, but also his children. Some of us call it the octopus hole. In his bandana hat, blue corners knotted like a pirate playing games, he calls me to the edge of the pool with, "Sit on my shoulders." Climbing there, I hold onto his outstretched hands, and we wade in. "We gotta be careful," he says. "There might be an octopus down there, or an alligator hole ahead." I imagine the jagged teeth, the tentacles, the deep, deep hole, which we may never return from. "Hold on, you never know when they'll come out. Don't look down." Step, step, step. In deeper, water inches past my heels to my shins. Cool, satisfying water. The sun is bright in the sky, and it seems I am a giant, high up on a firm seat. "We gotta be careful," he says again. "You never know what might be lurking, what might be there to snatch us, to pull us to the bottom." Step, step, step. "Keep a lookout, you never know." And down we go, plunging into a hole that has opened up at the bottom of the pool. I hold my breath just in time, and we both come up spluttering and laughing. The danger isn't real. I am safe, and of course, I want to do it again and again. In his way, my grandfather was preparing me for the dangers ahead, both imaginary and real. And each time, he held out his hand. Until now. There's nothing like death to stop the world in its turning. The wind in a great solemn gasp even holds its breath, and the sound of distant traffic becomes a crashing roar of angry animals baying at my window that I do not have the words to silence. The vital things, the really important tasks, the essentials, all get scrapped. The time is now. No more planning for the future. It has all disappeared with his exhalation of breath. But today, we, the grandchildren, remember the man, the flesh and blood of him, the silences, the looks, the laughs, the history buff, the puppet man, the tree chopper, the bocce captain of the Sandouche, the mentor, the promoter, the artistic validator, the man with the monkey hat, the ditty king, the catalyst, the storyteller, one of the extraordinary pair, and the revolutionary groove master, the conversationalist, the host, the canoeer, the instructor, the keeper of his post. Now, we are his written word, his painted picture, his dance, his love spoken and unspoken, all seeds in us. And we give God thanks for every seed sown by him. Thank you.
My name is Sam DuPont. I am Paul's oldest grandson. And I remember coming up here to Lyme to visit late one summer when we were young. We arrived, and Papa told us a story. Over breakfast, he told me and Rosie that a wealthy archduke had recently paid him a visit, and that a mishap had occurred. Papa had been showing the archduke his frog pond, and the archduke had slipped on a wet rock and fallen headfirst into the pond. Being a wealthy man, the archduke had, of course, been carrying a great number of coins from many foreign countries. And when he took his dive into the frog pond, all these coins had spilled out into the water. Well, said Papa, the only thing for us to do was for us to help him drain the pond, clean out all the mud and muck, and see if we could find all those coins. Needless to say, we took to our task with abandon and scoured the frog pond for the Austrian and Italian and Czech and German coins that somehow had been scattered in the water. It has never been so clean before or since. I will remember Papa for his sense of fun, and I will miss his sense of humor. I asked a few of my cousins about their memories of Papa, and invariably we all think of playing in the pool, taking trips down the Nile, Papa playing the part of the ravenous alligators, canoeing on Uncas Pond in the 8 Mile River, looking out for turtles, herons, and sandpipers. Bocce tournaments, competitive, to be sure, but firstly fun, with prizes for the winners of the Lord Nelson Cup, the Wood Duck Memorial, and the Inuit Sondouche Classic. I think we'll all miss his keen sense of the absurd, his raucous humor, his readiness to play games and laugh with his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. Another side of Papa I long admired was his eagerness to learn about and understand the world, and to pass his wisdom on. I remember being tested on the bird species native to southeastern Connecticut, learning the names of the chickadees and woodpeckers feeding at his bird feeder. And then Papa's playful drills identifying the paintings of the famous Dutch artists of the 17th century. A pop quiz has never been greeted with so much enthusiasm. I remember being about 14, Rosie was 12, and George was about 7, when he sat us down and asked us, "So, what can you tell me about North Korea?" Not much. And so he shared with us what interesting facts he had learned from reading about that peculiar country, and showed us pictures from the news, and sent us on our way, of course, with reading assignments to further our own education on the subject. This, too, is something many of my cousins recalled, listening to Papa read to us as children, and as we grew older, talking with him about books, about history, and about the world. We were lucky enough to see him over Thanksgiving. He was in the hospital, his body failing him. But George and I had scarcely walked in the door before he was pressing me for the names of my professors so he could look up their work, eager to know what I had been reading for my courses, and pushing on George the Revolutionary War history book he had been reading. Always eager to understand our lives and our passions, to further our learning, and to help us along in pursuit of our dreams. He never stopped thinking, never stopped observing, learning, and analyzing. His paintings were also this way, interpretations of the beautiful and the extraordinary that he saw in the world. That fascination, that inexhaustible curiosity about the world around him is a wise lesson, and one that I have certainly tried to learn, one of many. I will miss him, and I will remember the delight he took in the world and in the people whom he loved. Thank you.
Now I invite the grandchildren to sing our next song, at least those who were not fired in rehearsal last night.
reading today from Acts 17. That they should seek the Lord, verse 27, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being.
My name is Charlie Harper, the favorite son. My brothers and sisters and my niece and nephew have shared many of the gifts of spirit that my father has bestowed upon them over the years. Humor, creativity, perseverance, love, intellectual curiosity, and so on. And in that spirit, I'd like to add a couple of more. In the spiritual journey, we are in a constant state of what could be known as paradox. For example, we might say, it is all up to us. It is all up to God. We might say, to desire is to create. To desire is to destroy. And one of my father's favorites was live this day as if it was the last day of your life and as if you were going to live forever. My dad had a couple of other obvious paradoxical qualities. On one hand, he loved to engage in rigorous debate and conversation and discussion about issues and decisions to be made. But on the other hand, he might say, the best kind of meeting is with me, chairman, and everyone else home with the flu. On one hand, he raised his children who seemed to all suffer from what we call in our household ADD, applause deficit disorder. It appears we were all nurtured to go into professions where, at least at some point and some time, a spotlight became attached. And of course, Paul was not afraid or did not avoid the spotlight or attention. Yet he might say to us at times, if you want attention, walk down the street with a sock in your mouth. Fortunately, for those of us who are on this spiritual journey traveling in the world of paradox, Walt Whitman offers us some words of comfort. He says, do I contradict myself? Very well, then, I contradict myself. I'm large enough to hold multitudes. Paul Harper held multitudes. Another paradox was that my dad respected and admired the church, particularly the ministry of this church, its social outreach, the intellectual integrity of its ministers. But he was not a church-going man. He might say, it is good to worship in the catacombs. It is good to be human in the skyscrapers and on the streets. Let me explain. When I was a boy, we would often vacation in Vermont. My father one day was working on a painting of an old Vermont barn that was waiting in August grass and surrounded by a canopy of green trees. I asked him why we never went to church. He took me out onto the porch of that house, and he pointed around him, and he said, "This is my cathedral." I think I finally know what he meant. In our reading from Acts, St. Paul talks about the God in whom we live and move and have our being. In other words, God is no longer up there somewhere playing celestial checkers with our lives. God is no longer up there, and more importantly, we don't have to wait down here somewhere for seraphim and cherubim to come blasting their horns and throwing us into a state of mysterium tremendum. You know, for St. Paul, not only is God in the one in whom we live and move and have our being, God is around us so that we can use the faculties of the human spirit, our intellect, our hearts, our sense of smell, our sense of touch, our sense of taste, to experience the one in whom we live and move and have our being. So, a spiritual experience, and by extension, a person open to the wonders and the richness and the beauty of the universe, could experience the divine through mindfulness, awareness of the present. Moments of grace themselves come when we are so engaged in the passions of our lives, so engaged that we know that we're doing exactly the right thing at the right time, and time itself is no longer of the essence. In this way, while my dad didn't necessarily believe in God, he knew God. Paul knew God in the creative restlessness of his own spirit, like a chrysalis driving to become a butterfly, or a frog becoming a tadpole. He too, by nature and by nurture, had this deep desire to break through the status quo and become a full expression of himself. When he was serving as the chairman of the American Association of Advertising Agencies and the chairman emeritus of Needham Harper Worldwide, he wrote a presentation entitled Quest for Fire, which he took around the world. And in it, he celebrated the great iconoclasts, the breakers of icons who could not and would not settle for the status quo. Men and women whose quest for fire, for creativity, was ceaseless. And in that spirit, he had explored and he celebrated the lives of James Joyce and Martha Graham and Picasso and even Vince Lombardi's T-bone offense. For Dad, being an iconoclast meant always being open and to new learnings, new perspectives, and even new ways of being. And he did not have much patience for those who thought they had a corner on the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Those who, like patience etherized on a table, went through life rearranging old ideas and old prejudices and believing they were new ideas. Now let me give you an example of his own iconoclastic behavior. A couple of years ago, I saw him reading War and Peace. Now, I knew from the past that when he was a young Marine being shipped over to Saipan, that he had read War and Peace a long time ago. So I was moved to ask him, what made you read War and Peace again? He said, well, I read it when I was 22, but I've never read it when I was 88. The same with his painting. And just as you thought he got comfortable with his oil paints and his landscapes, suddenly you'd walk into his studio and he'd be up on a stepladder drawing with charcoal 8-foot waterfalls. And just as you thought he got comfortable with the charcoal, suddenly his medium would change to ink. And the same with music. Just as you thought you had him tagged as a lover and an appreciator of classical music, out from his speakers would come Marathi music, Jamaican ska, African music, which he loved to dance to. Now, these transformations were illustrative of his desire to learn, and as he learned, to be gifted with new understandings, new perspectives on history, on art, on theater, on politics, all different dimensions of the one in whom he lived and moved and had his being. He knew God in the joy that he found in life itself. And Thomas Wolfe said, "It is not about escaping life, it's about not letting life escape you." He found joy, deep joy, in his family, in the wonderfulness and laughter of children and grandchildren playing octopus in his swimming pool. The stories of his prodigal sons and daughters returning from Alaska and Los Angeles and New York and Chicago and Arizona to share their artwork, their music, their written word, their ministries, and their social work, the adventures and misadventures that we all had. And he seemed to have a boundless and endless curiosity about everything we had done, asking us questions about sometimes strange new ideas that had come from these new worlds we had experienced. He knew joy. He knew to the divine in the ferocity of his competitiveness on the tennis court and on the bocce court. I will say he probably knew the divine more in the victory, in the thrill of victory, than the agony of defeat. And he knew joy in nature, sitting on a rock in the woods, painting or drawing a simple impression of what he was seeing or what he was feeling. In moments of serenity as he walked through the woods, seeing a bird that he had never seen before, or seeing a bird he had seen dozens of times before, and greeting it like an old friend. In his canoe rides through the reeds and rushes and rivers and lakes, where he could sit with ease and gratitude for everything everywhere. He found the joy of the divine in culture itself. In the theater, when the curtain would come down and the lights would come up, and a profound new idea would hit him like a 2x4, or he'd be touched by a moment of hilarity. In the galleries, the museums, the dozens of galleries and museums that he visited, and so many of which he served on as a board member. He found joie de vivre in his travels, in the images and the countless images of cultures and histories and people and places and things that he was able to visit from around the world. He found the joyousness of life in this very community of Old Lyme and Lyme, with people like you who would share their poetry, their art, their life stories, their laughter, their crafts, and their music. Now, Paul did not hoard the joy he found, nor the beauty he found. My sister-in-law shared that one of Paul's greatest gifts to her was his willingness, his desire to lead others to beauty. If someone expressed an interest in history, sure enough, there would be tomes of historical novels arriving at their dorm room or at their house. If someone was interested in painting, they were invited into a studio to paint right alongside him. And of course, if someone was interested in the outdoors, he would quite literally lead them to the places of beauty that he had discovered on his adventures. Finally, Paul knew joy. He knew God. Any day he sat at the breakfast table across from the love of his life, his wife of 67 years, my mom, Eleanor Harper. He knew God in that unconditional love, the agape that they exchanged between each other. When together they would talk and share from their very different perspectives of the world, their joys, their concerns, and their sorrows. You know, my mother's middle name is Storrs, and my father's middle name is Church, and it is said together they make a town. I don't know about that, but they've certainly made enough children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to populate a town. So I don't know about that, but I do know, for all of us, they've made a wonderful life in the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Let us join together in the spirit of prayer. The sun rises, the eagle takes flight, and the sun begins its setting. Its workday ended, throwing a shining peace over the shoulders of Paul C. Harper, Jr., as he gallops horses across the plains of Fountain Valley, as he immerses himself and his mind in the stacks of Yale, as he becomes a man in full in the Marine Corps, works the territory in advertising, blends paints on a canvas, and holds his wife's hand. He shares wisdom and kindness to all who cross his path, and making a home with love all around him. The day has come. Today we let him go. One more loss, one more season of grief, a feeling of sadness that comes over us, a feeling we cannot resist, and life sometimes feels like endless toil and we long for rest. He is gone now, free from his earthbound vessel, free to receive the love that is his to receive, free to paint castles of ideas in the skies. We offer thanksgiving for all he was in his service to this country as a Marine and as a patriot. We offer thanksgiving for his life among us and all he meant to those who loved him. We give thanks for all he was as a father, a husband, a brother, a grandfather, an uncle, a great-grandfather. We give thanks for all he meant in every community, particularly this community, in which he has shared his gift of creativity and leadership. And now, in this moment of silence, hear our individual prayers for Paul and his family. We pray these things in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being.
Live well, therefore, this day. For today, well lived makes every tomorrow a day of hope, and every yesterday a fond memory. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace this day and forevermore. Amen. Amen.
Paul Harper, United States Marine Corps, departed.